Hello and welcome to Communication Connection. I'm Terry Likes. Thank you so much for joining us. One of the major milestones in the career of a professor is the publication of a book that he or she has authored. And today we are joined by someone who has come out now with a second book. Our guest is Dr. Pete Smith, an associate professor in the Department of Communication. Pete, congratulations and welcome to Communication Connection.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here on a Maroon Friday.
Yes, Maroon Friday.
That's right.
But before we start talking about the book, let's give the audience a little bit of your background. You went to State as an undergrad.
I did.
A rich history here. You went away and gained perspective from Auburn and Southern Miss with graduate degrees, but State is your home.
State is my home. I actually grew up an Ole Miss fan. It's a tightly, not so closely tight secret, but grew up an Ole Miss fan, but I had the opportunity to do a campus visit as a student in high school and in community college, and I fell in love with the campus. I mean, how many times have we heard that story, right? You come to campus and you fall in love with it, and that was the case with me. And I decided to go to school here and actually was an accounting major for a year and then did a fast retreat from McCool to McComas in my sophomore year.
Well, great. Well, journalism history is a passion for you, but you've taught a wide array of courses in communication and media studies, and now a new challenge for you, teaching at the graduate level in the new graduate program.
That's right. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I joked with my seminar graduate class last Monday, they are my first graduate students in a graduate program. 20 years, now in my 21st year, my first graduate class. And you think about that as a milestone, right? Because many assistant professors, when they first enter into the academy, graduate teaching is a part of their job as well as undergraduate teaching. But I've spent 20 plus years teaching undergraduates, who I still love to teach. But in my 21st year to have my first real graduate class, that was a moment for me, and I'm looking forward to it. It's a seminar and rhetoric class.
And you'll have another new class in the fall in qualitative research.
Qualitative research methods, including historical methods of research, which is what I focused on in graduate school.
So journalism history, of course, historical methods. You're our resident historian in all things Mississippi and journalism. That's right. So you certainly have your roots there. And part of a service component for a faculty member is to be involved in leadership roles within organizations, and you've certainly done that via the American Journalism Historians Association.
That's right. I served as president of AJHA, as we call it. It's roughly about 300 faculty members from around the country. Most are former journalists, education reporters, crime beat reporters who got into academia for a variety of reasons. And getting your PhD, you have to find a research focus, right? So writers write what they know, and they also study what they know. And so it's an organization made up of journalism and media studies professors who study journalism history of some vein. Mine is more 20th century Cold War to latter half of the 20th century history, Southern history and politics in particular, and the intersection with journalism. But you have scholars of 17th, 18th, 19th, international and American journalism in the organization.
And with all of your accomplishments in the last couple of years, you've won a couple of major awards. I'll just list those for our audience, not to make you blush or anything. 2023 Mississippi Humanities MSU Inaugural Humanities Fellowship Award. That was in 2021, I'm sorry. In 2023, the Humanities Council Teacher of the Year in Mississippi. Quite the honors, and I'm sure you're pleased as this 20-plus year career, you've been able to build toward this level of success.
I've had a lot of success on the back end of my career. Not to say the front end of my career wasn't successful. I gained promotion and tenure here at the university in 2011, but to have those accolades at the end, near the end of my career, I'm not going anywhere. I've still got at least 10 years plus in me, but to have those accolades at the end and to have them come from the College of Arts and Sciences and from the Mississippi Humanities Council means a lot, because this university does have a special place for me, not just as a longtime faculty member, certainly there's that, but being able to be a member of 3 different communities within MSU as a student who once walked the halls of McComas and took classes in the very classrooms which I teach in, and then of course as an alumnus and a faculty member.
So in this 20-plus year career, you wrote a book a while back, and now a new one has come out featuring women who've made a significant impact in Mississippi journalism history. And before we talk about some of those women, interesting title, Birddogs and Tough Old Broads. Kind of give us an overview of the book and the title.
Yeah, I grin at that title because, you know, historians and book authors work hard on the title, right? And usually that comes at the back end. I had that title almost from day one, and I wanted something, even though it's a book for an academic classroom and audience, I wanted something that spoke to more the general public, because I do think there's a wider readership for that book. Birddogs and Tough Old Broads, Women Journalists of Mississippi in a Century of State Politics, 1880s to 1980s. That front end of the title is in reference to one journalist who I reference quite a bit and have a chapter on in the book, Norma Fields, the first full-time woman state correspondent for the Capitol. She worked at then what was called the Tupelo Daily Journal. Now it's the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal. And she has quite a legacy there at the paper. I had the current correspondent for the Northeast paper, a young man, sent me a DM on social media recently, and when he heard about my book, he said, "That book's not worth reading if Norma Fields isn't in it." I said, "Oh, she's in it." In fact, the Birddogs and Tough Old Broads comes from a reference. She was at a press conference held by then Governor Cliff Finch of Mississippi in the mid-1970s, and Louisiana Governor Edwin Edwards was there as well. And Norma was being Norma. She was a dogged reporter, and during press conferences, she would not wait to ask a follow-up question or to get attention. She would just pelt the speaker or whoever with the question. And Edwin Edwards leaned over to Cliff Finch and asked, "Who dat tough old broad?" So I found that quote and I said, "Oh, that's got to go in there somewhere." And then longtime correspondent Bill Miner, who had his own newspaper, the Capitol Reporter, and covered the Mississippi State Capitol for 40 plus years for the Times-Picayune and his own paper, basically in one conversation remembered Norma Fields as a bird dog, and how she covered and exposed corruption at the state level. The Mississippi Highway Commission, which is now MDOT, was one of her big exposés. So that book, that title is in reference specifically to Norma, but it's also in reference to the other dozen women who were in the book. They were all, in my estimation, bird dogs and tough old broads.
And we have to keep in mind that the sense of history involved in that many women who were entering journalism were relegated by their employers to cover lighter topics.
That's right.
Housewares and,
that's right.
and food and so forth. But these were trailblazing women that you focused on.
Right. Now, I also focus on a few select women who used their journalism to reinforce racism and white supremacy during the Jim Crow era, right? So Florence Sillars Ogden, Mary Dawson Kane, who actually ran for governor in the 1950s. So these are not necessarily all women who need to be celebrated, but I think there's some lessons there in the what I call Jim Crow journalism of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s as well. The lion's share of the women in the book profile, their journalism was post-Watergate. Right, and they all worked at various, or went to school at various universities around the country, as far north as Maine, as far west as California, and they came to Mississippi because there were job opportunities here. As one journalist, Ellen Ann Fentress, a native Mississippian, told me, one reason women had opportunities to cover hard news subjects like politics is we were, quote, cheap labor. Right, but you're right. Women, for the most part, in the history of journalism, have been relegated to what's been called soft news, and they really had to work their way through the trenches and hopefully find supportive, mostly male editors like a Bill Miner or Andy Reese, who was head of the UPI Bureau in Jackson, that saw opportunity for these women, but also saw them as cheap labor.
Mm-hmm. Another one that you focused on in the book, Carolyn Patterson, a Mississippi native and and a distinguished editor, National Geographic magazine.
Yeah, I didn't focus on her in the book, but she was.
my apologies.
No. That's fine, because her story and my research into Carolyn was really kind of my entryway into this type of biographical research. It's been about a decade, but Carolyn Bennett Patterson's papers are housed here at the library, Mitchell Memorial Library, Special Collections. And I started sifting through those papers looking for a project, right? And I was really fascinated by the fact a native Mississippian, someone who attended Mississippi State, she eventually transferred to LSU, we won't hold that against her. She worked her way up through the ranks at National Geographic magazine to become what was then called the Legends editor. The Legends are the captions that ran at the bottom of the maps and photos within National Geographic magazine. And I found an interesting, complex story there. It's a lesson of magazine history, right? But it's also a gender-based history looking at the discrimination that Carolyn faced. And from that story that was published in a journal around 2011, I started getting really interested in wondering, are there other women journalists? I already had the interest in journalism history, but then I began to look at journalism history from this feminist, gendered angle. Are there other women like Carolyn Bennett Patterson who faced significant obstacles but still was able to make an impression in their roles as editors or journalists or both? And that's when I ran across the papers of Norma Fields. Her papers are also housed here at Mitchell Memorial Library. We have a rich, vast journalism collection. And so I wanted to take advantage of that. A lot of my earlier research was in broadcasting history, and I was having to go off to far-flung locations, New York City and the New York Public Libraries there. But I started focusing on Mississippi journalism history about 10 years or so ago, 15 years, because number one, it was convenient, and number two, there are a lot of interesting stories in our own backyard that cross over into my research interest.
It's all about storytelling.
That's right.
Pete, where can one find your book?
Well, Amazon, of course. Do a subject search for the title, Birddogs and Tough Old Broads. Also, Rowan and Littlefield Publishers, the book company. They have their own website, www.rowan.com. That's ROWMAN.com. And you should be able to do a search for the book there.
Well, Birddogs and Tough Old Broads, the modern day political journalist can owe a lot to the history and to these women impacted, and you've done a great job in chronicling them, and we congratulate you on your success, and we invite everyone to take a look at the book and give it a read. I think you'll find it to be quite enjoyable. Pete Smith's been our guest. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for joining us here on Communication Connection. I'm Terry Likes. We'll see you next time.